The era around 3000 BC saw more than 500,000 tons of copper mined from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. According to the research of Philip Coppens in his work Copper, A World Trade in 3000 BC. The largest mine was on Isle Royale, an island in Lake Superior near the Canadian border. Here, there are thousands of prehistoric copper pits dug thousands of years ago by an unknown ancient people. Were these the Clovis people or were these the pre-Clovis people? The mining operation on Isle Royale was neither small nor primitive even by today's standards. The mining belt on Isle Royale is 1 3/4 miles in length and nearly 400 feet wide. The copper pits range from 10 to 30 feet deep with a maze of connecting tunnels that one archaeologist estimated would have taken the equivalent of 10,000 men working for 1,000 years to dig. After 2 centuries of speculation, no one has ever satisfactorily explained either the identity of the miners or where all of this copper mined by these unknown miners went. Dating of the relics found at the site revealed that extraction of copper from Isle Royale began in 5300 BC, with some researchers even claiming that it began as early as 6000 BC. Evidence for smelting is known to exist from only 4000 BC onwards. The exact amount of the mined ore is perhaps never going to be exactly determined, but what is known is that about 1200 BC, all mining activity was halted. But around 1000 AD, mining was restarted and lasted until 1320 AD. During this period, more than 2,000 tons of copper ore were removed. These ancient mining operations suggest a widespread and sophisticated trade network, far older than conventional history acknowledges. But Michigan wasn't the only place where extensive mining occurred in ancient America. If we turn our attention to the Southwest, we find that Arizona, too, has a long and rich history of extracting valuable resources, dating back thousands of years. Welcome back to In Search of Tontonteac. Salt, silver, gold, copper, and turquoise have been mined in Arizona for at least since 1000 BC. We know that ancient Arizonans like the Hohokam, Patayan, ancestral Puebloan, and Mogollon peoples mined metals like copper and silver and precious gems like turquoise and traded those valuable goods with each other. Their descendants, which include O'odham, Quechua, and Hopi people, continued their ancestors' mining traditions. And as we saw in the Father Kino episode, a great deal of the mining was being done within this area during colonial times. The Grand Canyon has always appeared like a mine to me. I often thought that this may be an ancient mine. The traditional sources suggest that the Grand Canyon is not an ancient mine, and that it was formed over millions of years carved by the Colorado River. Who were these ancient miners of pre-Columbian America? Ancient America was vastly different than what we have been told. We are often told that civilization began in Sumer, and yet we have the oldest mummy found here in the southwest of North America. We are missing a great deal of information on these areas, and I believe that was deliberate in nature. Adolphe Bandelier, 1840–1914, was a Swiss-born archaeologist, historian, and anthropologist who played a big role in studying the indigenous cultures of the American Southwest, Mexico, and South America. He was a major figure in shaping the mainstream historical narrative of the Pueblo peoples, particularly regarding the ancestral Puebloans, Anasazi, Zuni, and Hopi. He worked closely with the Archaeological Institute of America and conducted research funded by the School of American Archaeology, later part of the Smithsonian Network. His early work was heavily influenced by Lewis Henry Morgan, who promoted the idea that native societies followed a fixed evolutionary pattern: savagery, barbarism, civilization. This framework was later criticized for being overly simplistic. He lived among the Zuni in the late 1800s and wrote The Delight Makers, 1890, a novel based on his observations, though it romanticized aspects of Zuni culture. He focused on studying Chaco Canyon, Pecos, and Bandelier National Monument, which is named after him, reinforcing the idea that the ancestral Puebloans were the direct ancestors of modern Pueblo groups. He was part of the push to discredit theories of Old World influence on Native American civilizations, which I believe was done intentionally to suppress alternative histories. Adolphe Bandelier was an anthropologist, not an archaeologist. He was not trained as a field archaeologist but wrote many historical narratives based on assumptions rather than direct evidence. He would often dismiss oral traditions, and he relied heavily on certain written Spanish records rather than native oral traditions, which means his reconstructions were often skewed. He was influenced by government-backed institutions. I suspect that the Smithsonian has been working purposely to reshape or control the narrative about indigenous history in North America. Bandelier rejected the idea that the 7 cities of Cibola were anything beyond the Zuni Pueblos. Why would a respected institution like the Smithsonian work to shape history in a particular way? Perhaps the answer lies in a much older strategy, one that predates the Smithsonian itself. The control of history has always been a tool of power, and few understood this better than the Catholic Church and the Spanish Crown during the Age of Exploration. Well, controlling history and the narrative has long been a part of human experience. Let me explain. The Spanish, acting on the assumption that there were no previous civilizations existing on the North American continent, rushed in to claim the empty lands granted them by the Papal Bulls. In spite of contemporary tales of others finding the New World, the Catholic Church, through its major sponsors at the time, the Spanish court and the Jesuit Brotherhood, were able to ensure that history would show that Christopher Columbus was the first to find the New World. Spain was his sponsor, and thus Spain was due a legal and rightful claim to the entire New World, including all riches and human slaves that could be found there. However, during the initial exploration, to their chagrin, there were signs that there had been a pre-existing civilization. There was even evidence that there had been a pre-existing Christian civilization in North America. This fact alone, if proven, would have thrown the ownership of this great land up for grabs, as the Papal Bulls would not have applied to the New World. Under the instructions of their religious advisors, the Spanish moved to eradicate the evidence of earlier settlements, thus making the New World safe for conquest. The arrival of the Spanish was not an accident. There was a legal basis for their move to the New World. In 1095, at the beginning of the Crusades, Pope Urban II issued an edict, referred to as a Papal Bull. The first of these papal edicts affecting the New World was called Terra Nullius, meaning empty land. This bull gave the kings and princes of Europe the right to discover or claim land in non-Christian areas. This policy was further extended in the year 1452 when Pope Nicholas V issued a papal bull entitled Romanus Pontifex, declaring war against all non-Christians throughout the world and authorizing the conquest of their nations and territories. These religious edicts treated non-Christians as uncivilized subhumans, and therefore without rights to any land or nation. Christian leaders claimed a God-given right to take control of all lands, and used these papal edicts to justify war, colonization, and even slavery of the people living in the conquered lands.